It's a traumatic event most often for a person to bring in their animal to be euthanized. We view it as a much more humane method of putting a dog down. After all, we're putting the dog to sleep, and eventually, of course, their heart stops, and it's a much more humane method than some of those practices now virtually outlawed at other shelters. Animals brought into the shelter, we maintain the animal for a period of 7 days should they have a collar on them, 5 days without a collar. The reason, of course, is that when we retain the animal for 7 days is in the hope that the owner comes back, and the same with 5 days, comes in and reclaims the animal. After those two respective periods of time, we put the animal up for adoption, and failing that, then it depends on the inventory of the shelter as to whether we keep the animal in-house before it's euthanized. That's done here within the shelter following euthanization, and as I pointed out too, it's done by euthanization is accomplished by inoculation, and it's virtually painless. It takes just seconds to a few minutes, and then of course it's euthanized on occasion because there aren't enough animals to warrant euthanized animals to warrant the firing up of the incinerator. Hard topic to discuss, but nevertheless the truth. We wouldn't fire it up for any less than a number that makes it, or than the numbers to be incinerated have reached a point at which it's necessary to fire up the incinerator. In that interim, there might be some animals kept in a freezer till we've reached that number that warrants firing up the incinerator. Sounds cold to talk about it in that fashion, but facts are facts. In 2010, we euthanized 1,864 cats and 588 dogs. As to whether or not they're given a fair chance, we give them all the chance that we're afforded, and then, as I described, we only have so many kennels to house, be they dog or a cat, and once we're full and we've exceeded those days necessary, as required by law and or statute, when we can no longer house them beyond some days in the hopes of their adoption, we're then forced to euthanize them. We can't warehouse animals after all. We make every attempt to see that the animal has a fair opportunity to get adopted through their listing on a national network called Pet Finder. We're in touch with rescue organizations. There are people that come in periodically just to look at the population and take a look at those animals that are available for adoption. And we make every effort to get them adopted out, but as I pointed out earlier, there are there's more animals in the animal population than there are families who wish to have an animal in their household. We're going to implement a program wherein someone wishing to adopt an animal will go to a vet practice, get a receipt for prepaid sterilization, come back with the receipt, and we will afford them a rebate for the cost of that. Those costs, and the Humane Society, I only got the message this morning that they're going to afford people who adopt an animal from the animal control shelter $50 towards that sterilization. We're looking at a like amount for dogs and perhaps less for a cat, because sterilizing a cat is considerably cheaper than for a dog. So it should greatly decrease their cost between the Humane Society and Bay County Animal Control, and hopefully more and more people will take advantage of that opportunity. And we have a quarantine section to which the public isn't allowed access. The rest of the kennels, we have done a temperament test on the animal to determine that it's not going to prove a danger to the public visiting the animal, and as I pointed out earlier too, it's in the hopes of adoption through their viewing of the animal, interacting. We have an exercise area in which they can take the animal and interact with the animal. We've got a cattery in which the cats are displayed in a nicer fashion than in a kennel or a cage, and people are able to interact with them in the cattery and or in a visiting room that we've got back there. And oftentimes that aids in our adoption of animals, the opportunity to interact with the animal they're interested in. I guess the point I'd like to make is sterilization decreases the numbers that come in our doors. That's the first thing. And be responsible as an owner of your animal. You know, don't infringe on the rights of others because you own an animal, whether they own one or not. And so keep in mind too that we are, after all, looking out for the best interests of the public in our operation, as well as I pointed out earlier, the animals as well, cats and dogs. And it's only as a last resort that unfortunately we're forced to put animals down. And as I say, they can cut greatly into cut the number of animals we receive out here greatly if they just have their animals sterilized, you know.